Live from Las Vegas, it's theCUBE. Covering VMworld 2017. Brought to you by VMware and its ecosystem partners.
I'm Stu Miniman, here with my co-host John Troyer, and you're watching theCUBE, SiliconANGLE Media's production of VMworld 2017. We're the worldwide leader in live tech coverage. Happy to welcome to the program, not only a first-time guest, but a first time for the company, Andrew Hillier, who is the CTO and co-founder of Densify, and not only first time we've had Densify, we didn't even have Serba on, so I'm not sure what the problem was, but appreciate you joining us, and looking forward to learning about you in the company.
Glad to be here, it's good.
All right, Andrew, tell us a little bit about, you're a co-founder, so bring us back to the early days, what the idea was, and then there was some rebranding recently, so I know that's relevant to the conversation.
Sure, I'll tell you the story. So we're all about analytics. I mean, we started off by looking at all the data that's available and saying if you really do the math on it, you can make a lot of very important decisions and not leave them to opinions or chance. So we built out a very powerful analytics engine. A lot of big customers adopted it, run on-prem, drive huge savings in virtual environments, de-risk. And what we found was that everybody's really interested in those outcomes of the analytics, but not necessarily wanting to adopt software products. I mean, it's kind of the basis of all SaaS. So we went and made a SaaS version of that product that runs, it's like a brain in the cloud, to give the same outcomes, and we've kind of really now taken that to the extreme where it's as a service now, and it's called Densify. So we rebranded around that in the June timeframe to really capture the simplicity and the outcome of what we do, which is to drive down cloud cost, drive down the amount of infrastructure you need on-prem, and make it all work better.
Yeah, I'm wondering if you can give us just a little, from a macro standpoint, software and the different consumption models. You just walked through it a little bit, but what are customers looking for? Why has it been challenging before? And do we have it right this time?
Yeah, well, I mean, from our perspective, again, I think we get adopted, and traditionally in the past you'd have to deploy the product, so you'd have to provision servers to run it on, a database server, train people, have maybe a center of excellence around using it. And that's worked really well, but I think I think the novelty of running software is worn off for most organizations. I think they want to move on. As we see the cloud being adopted, people just want to get out of the business of running anything really, and have it all done for them. So we support the on-prem model and as a managed service on-prem, but really this new model is where everybody's going because it's just so simple. It means you can just adopt it and get results right away without reading any manuals or doing anything.
Andrew, we've been talking about cloud for years now, right? It was almost a joke, it's much more real now. Your customers and the people you talk with, hybrid cloud, multi-cloud, how many, we have a choice of many different platforms, on-prem is not going away anytime soon, at least, I don't know, I'd love your opinion on that, but your customer base, people you talk with, how many platforms are they on, what kind of platforms, and how does Densify pull all that together? Yeah,
it's funny because there's a bit of everything, and that's like IT, right? You always have one of everything you ever had, plus all the new stuff. So we, of course, see still huge virtual footprints out there. A lot of companies have big VMware environments, but there's definitely a big focus on the cloud. So almost every customer we have is in some form looking at it, is really they see that as the future. The cloud, containers, some mix of on and off-prem. So I think it's going to be hybrid for quite some time. I don't think you're going to see the on-prem go away. That would just be unrealistic, but again, a lot of energy is being put into the public cloud, and it shows. So one's almost a maintain mode in some cases, one's kind of the invest, we're investing in this new technology, and it's where a lot of the excitement is. So even our most conservative customers are looking at cloud in some way, and some of our newer customers are 100% cloud. There's no on-prem.
Andrew, talk to us about the relationship with VMware that you've had and have today, and I guess one of the questions I looked, VMware announced like 7 SaaS services, right. One which was Cost Insight. Does that compete at all against what you're doing? Well,
it's a hugely complicated space with a lot of different, and a lot of the same words used for all the same things. So we have a good relationship with VMware. We integrate with all the product line, VRA, VROPS, DRS, PDRS. We have integrations with all these things, and it works with that. But I think there's some confusion sometimes around people using the same words, like we optimize, or we do this or that. So what we find is that in the core of what we do is we analyze workload patterns, and it's like playing a game of Tetris. It's like saying that workload's busy in the morning, that one's busy at night. If we combine them together, we get a lot of efficiency, and nothing in the VMware product line does that. So it really plugs in really nicely with DRS, and again, VROPS, but there is confusion in the words people use, and people might think that does that. And there's some cost, there's a lot of products that do cloud cost. Every product that starts with the word cloud does cloud cost. But that's not really where you get this cost saving. It's really analyzing the workloads in the cloud is where you get the real cost savings.
Yeah, I'm curious, you must have a really good view as to utilization. So, I think back, there's lots of arguments as to how much utilization are we actually getting, because VMware, in the early days, it was like, oh, I'll consolidate servers, I'll get greater utilization. But we still kind of stink at utilization.
Yeah.
When I have gear, even cloud today, I've seen lots of companies, right, I can take huge amount of costs out of what you're doing. So how are customers doing? What are they good at? What do they suck at? And where are some of the things that you're helping really well?
Well, you struck a nerve there, because people are doing a terrible job in the cloud quite often. It's a lot of times they throw things up there and they don't even really look at what they're doing. It's kind of primitive in terms of the data collection and the tooling around that. So a lot of times you see people that don't even know what the workload is or what the utilization is. So we see some pretty big opportunities to carve that down. I mean, on-prem, I think people have gotten better. I think when they run our product, it's designed to get at the optimal utilization. And that might be 90%, it might be 50%, it might be 30%, depending on your requirements. And if you have a mission critical environment that is active, and redundant, and all these things going on, then maybe your utilization won't be very high, but that's as high as you can make it and meet all your obligations. If a dev test environment, you can run it a lot higher. So there is no one right answer for what the best utilization is. It depends on your workloads and what the environment's supposed to be doing. But universally in the cloud, we find it's just terrible, because they rush things into the cloud without having all the maturity around it to figure out how to optimize it.
Right. Andrew, does that mean then the common mistake is underutilization? Do people are just running a lot of instances without actually knowing what's running in them, or how much it's costing them?
There's underutilized, there's deadwood for starters, and that's kind of a different problem. It's not that they don't know what they're doing, it's somebody forgot them. So there's no process around that, there's no ITSM process to turn these things off, so we find a lot of that. Then there's the stuff that's not utilized very well at all that you could just be running better because somebody said I need an extra large and never revisit it. The other fascinating one that we do, and we find this quite a lot lately, is what we call modernization. So you look okay, but you're on an old instance. There's a newer one that's a lot cheaper. You're on an R3, you could be on an R4 in Amazon. So we find a ton of those, and it's because people deploy an app 6 months ago, a year ago, and it looked great, it still looks great, but they don't have the ability to analyze that and use benchmarks to say, I have a new instance that's as powerful as that one, that's cheaper. And you need the benchmarks to do that.
That's something that really doesn't happen when you have hardware, right? It's not like the server vendor calls you up and says, I have a new version I can swap out if you just tell me.
Yeah. I mean, in the cloud, I give the analogy to a cell phone company. It's like, they don't phone you and tell you they have a new plan that would be cheaper for you. You've got to kind of do that on your own. And so we do that for our customers. It's one of the things that we do, and we kind of do it for you. So we just tell you that you can just make this move, this kind of lateral move to a new instance and save a ton of money. And customers, they're too busy to become experts and read the news every morning to figure out if new instances come up. It's just too much, right?
Wait, they haven't seen these 17 announcements that Amazon had today that might have affected them? Does your tool make the change, recommend the change? How does that kind of workflow work?
Yeah, it depends on the platform how it works, but we have a very high degree of automation that we enable, and there's a few reasons. One is that the analysis is so precise that when it says you do this, you can just do that. So for example, on-prem, if we say move a VM, we know it's not supposed to go with those other ones for PCI compliance. We know that won't drive up the overcommit. So there's our equation has a lot of terms. It means it's very precise. So when we say to do something, you can just do it. And that means you can drive very high automation as a result.
What kind of granularity? Is this happening minute by minute or hour by hour or day by day?
Well, there's two levels of granularity. There's predictive and there's real time. So one of the main things we do is that we will kind of gather all the workload history and kind of learn the patterns of that and come up with a strategic plan saying, for tomorrow, do this, put the VMs in these places, and then leave DRS turned on, it'll do its thing, but it won't do very much because we've anticipated all the workload patterns. So a lot of times we'll do the kind of daily optimization, and then DRS and VROPs can do their things all day long. They just don't do as much. But we do also have real time. So if we see something getting hot, we will do a hot add on it, or we can do that as well. So we kind of have the combination of both predictive and reactive at the same time.
Okay. How do you handle kind of your pricing of the solution? I've heard some offerings out there that it's like, oh, we're going to save you millions and we're just going to take a fraction of that, rather that, or are you a more traditional licensing? How does that all work?
It's funny, the gain share we found is very hard to structure. Yeah. I mean, just it sounds great until you try and make the contracts for it. What we do is for on-prem, we do it by target, and that's a physical or virtual system. That's worked really well. That's the way a lot of our customers go there. In the cloud, that doesn't work because an instance could be anything from a tiny Docker container to a giant X1. So it's as a percentage of spend. And that's kind of what a lot of vendors kind of settle on in the cloud world. But we kind of don't make it infinitely variable. We know people they want the kind of predictability. So we kind of say, you're in this band, it's just going to cost this, and you can do whatever you want.
What do you have any kind of standard rule of thumb as to, if you have X kind of spend in the cloud, we'll usually save you X percentage, and wait, if you save them a lot more, doesn't that mean you're pushing them down into a lower tier? So, how does that get sorted out?
That's a great question. That's the hazard of it, but it doesn't hold us back from wanting to optimize. So what we find is if you just take, for example, right sizing the cloud, if you say you're underutilized, we can make you smaller in the same class. A lot of people would say 15% you might save. We find that the ability to go between instance classes, so again, you're a memory optimizer, you'd be compute optimized or vice versa. We found it's 35 to 40%, pretty reliably in our customers. So it's a it more than pays for the product many times over. It's pretty compelling, and it's pretty easy to get to, and it affects next month's bill, which is the biggest thing. On-prem is sunk cost. You can optimize it a lot, but it's until the next refresh, you may not realize the gains, but in the cloud, next month's bill will actually be smaller. So we find it's a lot of urgency to do it in the cloud.
Yeah. I'm curious, what are you seeing from customers these days between their on-premises environment and the public cloud? One thing that struck me for years is, if I bought gear and I'm not getting the results of the utilization out of it, that kind of got a lot of attention. When I go see the public cloud, there's plenty of customers like, oh, what do you know, I was spending 3x more than I expected, I guess I'll fix it later. And I was like, wait, if you were buying hardware, you would have fired somebody and beat up your sales rep and things like that. But public cloud seems to be less mature in that standpoint. Are you seeing that changing, or what are you seeing from customers?
Yeah, I think there is a realization that kind of sticker shock hits people where it is kind of 3 times more than they thought it would be. But to your point, there's also not really anybody whose problem that is a lot of times. So we do see that becoming someone's problem, like cloud architects, or we see kind of more roles that are financial optimization in the cloud, so people do care. So I think that's a very positive thing. I think when a lot of DevOps groups start using Amazon for the first time, it's a bit of a wild west, and they get agility, but nobody's really looking over their shoulder. I think that's starting to change pretty quickly.
Yeah, I wonder, one of the problems I've heard, I've talked to plenty of customers that are like, I have to dedicate an engineer to pricing when it comes to the cloud. Do you solve that? Do they still need to kind of have a dedicated person or part of a person, or is that part of the value that you offer?
Well, and that's a good question. It depends on the customer size, I think. So we see really small organizations, and again, the beauty of our new offering is that you can go to really small companies or really huge companies. We have customers with 100,000 systems and some with 500. And the smaller ones, they may not have a big team, so they may not have those roles. So some of our smallest ones, we're just that role for them. They don't have a person that's dedicated to that kind of thing. They just wait for our advisors to chime in, because we actually have a human advisor that's part of our service that gives you advice or insight into what's happening. So for the small ones, that can be that person. For larger companies like the big banks that are customers of ours, we kind of become one of the team. So you probably still have people with a lot of expertise, but maybe you don't need to rely on it so much. Maybe you can not have it at all, but it's more like we're someone that makes their life easier. So they can go on and focus on what they should be doing, which is not looking at the cloud pricing every morning.
Nice, I see that more and more, right? You need it's a service you're delivering, right? And that's not just bits and bytes, that's customer success, and you have people there that can help.
Yeah.
This stuff is crazy complicated, especially if you're, say, a VMware admin just getting into Amazon. The pricing, like we just said, right? The pricing is very complicated. So can you talk a little bit about, from the admin standpoint, the vRealize integration and some things like that? Or is this, there's an admin-facing piece, and I suppose then there's also the cost-facing piece?
Yeah, I think there's several ways we can be used. You can use us almost like middleware, and the admin doesn't necessarily even need to interact. Some of our customers we run as an engine that just sits there, it's getting data, analyzing, and then making changes. But you're still using VRA for blueprints and VRO, and that kind of comes through us, but it's kind of behind the scenes. So it's a nice use case because it just adds value without making anybody's life more difficult. We do have consoles that are very powerful, so if you're a capacity manager or a data scientist or a cloud architect, you can start logging in and actually seeing workload curves and stuff. So we have some use cases where our interface is used quite heavily, and some where it kind of sits in behind the scenes. And so for administrators, again, it tends to make your life better without making it worse. Again, they're really busy as well, and they don't, necessarily have time to look at that. So.
If you have a big investment in vRealize, right? That's great. It just sits behind the scenes. Tools you already know.
Yeah, exactly. We just pull data from it, and we push our else back. We pull rules from DRS. We push new rules down to DRS. It's all very clean, and so it makes it all better without overlapping. And again, it makes the environment calmer. So what we see in a lot of environments is you'll be able to fit a lot more work into it, and you don't have vMotion activity during business hours. So we're starting to measure that in our customers, because volatility is an important thing. Like a vMotion at noon, at the peak of your app being busy, it's not good, right? So we actually cause that to go away.
Yeah, and how much of your business is on premises and virtualized environment and versus cloud, and any kind of lineup as to where you spend the most time in the cloud?
Well, yeah. I think we have a lot of customers that are mostly VMware. I think a good portion of them are looking at cloud in some way. Some of our newer customers are 100% in the cloud, but that's kind of more because this is a newer offering and Densify is quite new. I think that's a smaller number right now, but as far as what we're chasing down, it's big. It's a very large portion of it. So I think it's really where we see where things are going. Again, we usually do both, but the cloud stuff has really captured their imagination. That's what they want to be doing.
Yeah. Any commentary on the VMware on AWS, stuff that we've heard so far?
Well, I think it's cool. It's great. It's another option. What I like about it is that what we find is when we analyze, there's technologies that overcommit and ones that don't. So I can take a workload and put it in a VMware environment and overcommit it, and that the patterns match up and get efficiency. If I put that in Amazon by a large instance, I might be wasting my money because I'm not using the whole instance. So, and I can't run a hypervisor in one of those. But what we found is that for certain transactional applications, it's much better to stack them together. For like batch workloads, it's better to run them in rent a large for an hour. So I think it's a great offering because for certain workloads, it is quite efficient. For other workloads, it's not, and we have, we're showing here today, the ability to analyze and compare the two, saying if you took that app and put it in the new VMware on Amazon versus standard small, medium, and large, what's the cost difference? It's a cool analysis because it's different for each app, right?
Yeah. If I saw right, there's free trial available on your site. Is there anybody that ever comes up, tries your stuff, and doesn't have something that saves them money?
No, we have a very good success when they try it because partly because it's so easy. I mean, it's 15 minutes, you pull down a connector for VMware and you plug it into vCenter or VROPS and the data goes up and then we just do it all for you and it'll always find something you didn't know or some savings or some hidden risks in there. Usually a lot of savings, hardware savings or software savings. We will optimize the software licensing. And in the cloud, it uncovers all kinds of stuff. We see all kinds of crazy stuff, utilization very low, so
I've run across people that do this similar sorts of things, at least at a high level, on the virtualized side and on the cloud side. I'm not sure that I've seen anybody that does it at both. Is that one of your differentiations? How do you line up? What's the competitive landscape look like?
Yeah, doing both is a big part. I think on each of them individually, we also do it much deeper. So like I said, in the virtual environments, our ability to play Tetris with the workloads is nothing else really like it. We put a lot of R&D on that, and in the cloud there's a lot of focus on the cost, but not necessarily digging deeper into what's the cause of that cost or your Kubernetes environment. The utilization of those nodes. So it requires deeper analytics than a lot of vendors actually have. So, yeah.
Do you give any advice as to them saying, I'm trying to decide if I want to do it on premises or in the cloud? Do you give any guidance that way?
I don't think there's any standard answer. We try to take sides. Like the data talks, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not an area for opinion, it's just the numbers will tell you what's best for your apps, and everybody's different.
You're talking, I've got this batch application, oh, well, heck, I can run this in, some extra large thing in the cloud, and, therefore it would cost me this versus, standing up some server farm.
Yeah, what we find is that the only real trick is that, like, absolutely, if you have something that's live for 12 hours and then off for a week, renting an instance for 12 hours is the way to go. But the other consideration, it goes back to one of your earlier questions, is multi-cloud. And how many different providers do you want? Because we'll analyze the environment and that app might be cheaper in Azure and that one might be cheaper in Google, but you're not going to put each app in each, so you're going to choose one or two and kind of send them all there. So the analytics understand that as well. They're saying, well, you're not going to spread stuff everywhere. We're going to find the best overall answer for your portfolio of workloads. That's an important thing.
Okay, so last question for you. The virtualization admins out there, is there anything that they're still doing kind of very wrong that that would make their environment more efficient?
Well, I think it's funny that we still see an awful lot of spreadsheets out there. It's funny when people try and do the numbers, like to figure out where to put a new app, and they'll still kind of figure that out in a very rudimentary way. When again, science will tell you that. So you can make that happen automatically. So there's still certain things I think people are doing manually that don't need to be done manually anymore, and maybe it's their comfort zone. Maybe it's admins, maybe it's other groups, but I think, again, one of our focus is saying that's great. Let's take your policies and your rules. We'll just embed them, encode them, codify them, and then you can move on to better things than updating a spreadsheet or generating reports to send to your team every week. We have very powerful reporting, so you can just make that happen and automatically to people. And so is getting out of those kind of tasks that people have done for years and moving up the value chain and saying, now I'm going to focus on cloud or on vSAN or whatever it is people want to be doing next.
All right, Andrew Hillier, appreciate you giving us all the updates on your company, and look forward to hearing more in the future. John Troyer and I will be back with lots more coverage here from VMworld 2017. You're watching theCUBE.